Welcome to the Rosenfeld Review. I'm your host, Lou Rosenfeld. My guest today is an old friend and, for at least Rosenfeld Media, new author, Christian Crumlish. Hey, Christian, how are you?
I'm good, thanks. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, we're drinking coffee together, though 3,000 miles apart on a Friday afternoon. It feels like it's beer o'clock to me, but I guess it's coffee o'clock, just a little longer. You may know Christian. I've known him for about, 20 years. Christian, you were, I think of you as one of the people that came out of the whole Yahoo, really smart UX people early on in their careers club. Like it seemed like Yahoo is one of those places that just had a corner on talent at a moment in time, just like the BBC did in London. And I'd say probably Razorfish has its own little Mafia alumni here in New York. And I've known you since then. You got real involved in the IA community. Nowadays, you describe yourself as a product and UX leadership consultant with a company called Design and Product. Your main client being the state of California, where you're trying to, I'm sure it's an interesting job. We might get some time to talk about it. Leading product for the COVID-19.ca.gov website at the Office of Digital Innovation. But a couple of times in that introduction, design or UX and product intersected. And not surprising that your book that is coming out in, I think it's January, pretty close,
That's
maybe
what I hear.
February. You should ask your publisher.
I
Product
should.
product management for UX people, from designing to thriving in a product world. It's got a great cover. I've seen and read the manuscript. It's in galley form. It's at the printer as of a couple days ago. We're very excited by that. And let's talk about it. So
I'm
you and
excited
I
too.
were talking about this, well, it was probably a year or two ago when you brought up the idea. And I loved it because it seems like we are all living in a product world. And I have a question for you about that. You know, if you look through UX versus product through, let's say, content lens, which I often use, maybe it's a publishing lens. I see a lot written on UX. I see a lot of conferences on UX. I see an emergent body of knowledge on UX. I don't know that I see that kind of content heft in product management. And is it just a matter of my limited view from my biased perspective, or is there something to it as someone who spans both worlds?
I think there is something to it. There's probably a couple factors going into that impression. One is that definitely product is, I'd say, behind UX in terms of maturity as a sort of a digital profession. I think it gelled more recently than UX did, at least in its current form. And as somebody who, as you mentioned, came up kind of with UX, even before UX was maybe the primary term for that, I was present at a lot of the emergence of mailing lists and online publications and conferences and books and training opportunities and communities of all kinds, communities of practice. And the internet design-oriented communities of practice have been quite rich and complex, and even had factions, as we know, that split from each other and then reconciled, et cetera. And I see the product management role and the job as somewhere in that same larger family of kind of intersecting, orchestrating roles on the internet that aren't necessarily about writing code and aren't necessarily about certain specific making crafts, but are necessary glue to getting coherent stuff built. And it's just that the product management role comes from a different lineage, and I think has taken some time to pull together as a community of practice. But I've seen an acceleration in the last 5 years or so. Mind the Product with its local product tanks and now kind of conferences all around the world planted a flag, I think. And as I think you and I mentioned, it's a quite UX friendly brand of product leadership or product thought. But there's others, and there's publications, and there's Slack groups. So I think a little bit is also that if you're firmly anchored in the UX world, then the overlap with product is out near the fringes, and you might be not be seeing entirely into the more product centered part of that world.
So, okay, so it seems like there's some, I'm afraid to use the word imbalance, but definitely some asymmetry in some senses where you have a more established, at least body of knowledge and maybe even community that is having to move toward the product world.
Mhm.
Your book says how to thrive. It's about thriving in a product world, not a
Right,
design world.
right, right.
And I don't know anyone is writing a book, that is called user experience design for product people thriving, designing and thriving in a design world.
Yeah,
The
yeah.
converse title I don't think is coming out anytime soon. So why is the balance of power well, imbalance? Let me go ahead and own that word here.
Yeah. I mean, that's a really deep question. It's super interesting. I think it goes to the heart, I think, of why some UX people start to think about going into product as a career move. Um, if they perceive that imbalance and they say, for whatever reason, the people with the product titles are more empowered, then there's a sense that, well, that job's not that different from mine. If I learn to do that, then I'll finally have that mythical seat at the table, or I'll be included. And I think there's some truth to that. Part of this is that product management is essentially a business frame. Becomes like UX, it has deep roots in marketing. So these things are cousins already in terms of you know um, scientific 20th century business models of trying to really understand what a market is or what people want, and then advertise to them or market to them or craft user experiences for them. Um, and I think the product frame, it's in some ways it's kind of a funny metaphor that people settled on, and it's equivalent. I mean, at Microsoft, the equivalent job was called program manager for a long
Hmm.
time, but even there, it wasn't clear if they meant PMO, like a person who manages many programs and coordinates a bunch of projects, or the manager of the software programs that they were building. I think there was some ambiguity in the title even then. Um, but for whatever reason, the product manager role has a certain amount of business DNA in it that is not always as apparent, I think, in the design identity and the design kind of posture inside enterprises. Um, and it somehow, I think, inherits some credibility, like speaking the language of the bosses in a way that
Hmm.
design often struggles with. I mean, one of the people I talked to in my last chapter in the book, which is about leadership, I talked to Harry Max for a while, who has often consulted with UX people trying to rise into leadership, and he told me that designers have to learn to talk differently and to communicate differently, and to not spend so much time telling the boss that they asked the wrong question and that the better question would be XYZ, but answer the boss's question, because an executive is constantly trying to parse information and figure out what the decision point is, and they don't necessarily want to know the history of UX for the last 15 years before
Hmm.
getting to the point. I'm stereotyping, obviously, but I think product sometimes comes with that metaphorical suit on already, and that gets it in the door. I think that's one reason why people find themselves inside product organizations, because leadership has somehow said these designers and these creative people, these engineers, they need a manager, and that term nowadays is product manager.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, you talk about the speaking the language of business and really the business aspects that are so integral to being a product manager. Uh, your book is, first of all, it's delightfully short. I actually, you don't know this, but we had to pay your editor a bonus because of that. So thanks a lot. But the guts of the book are chapters titled like "The Business of Product is Business," product analytics, growth and engagement and retention, testing hypotheses with experiments, getting the money, and roadmaps and how to say no. Those sound like they could be out of many business textbooks.
Yes, and I think the what's interesting is that in the context of making software together, usable software that people want, that they'll pay for, or that they'll support, with their attention. Um, the UX designer or strategist or researcher has a lot to offer in those questions of how are we going to grow? How are we going to find a market and meet its needs? How are we going to make money, enough money to keep this going? Even I'm working with government right now. We don't sell stuff to people, but we still have budgets and we still have to do things in an affordable way. We have to spend money that's cost effective. So
Hmm.
I think design at times, by being so much focused on kind of uh, the the experience that's being crafted, the details of the experience, sometimes leaves itself out of the broader conversation of, are we even making the right thing? And of all the things we could do, which are no doubt all good things, what are the tough decisions we have to make, to reach our goals right now? I think I say somewhere in the book that if you really want to be a product manager, you're going to have to get used to not saying it depends anymore. You have to
Hmm.
give people actual answers. And again, it's a stereotype, but it seems like those of us who got drawn into UX sometimes are of a temperament where we'd kind of be happy researching and refining forever. It's almost like the perfection and the ideal is the goal. Whereas I think sometimes the product frame, you know, um, is more about taking everything we know right now and giving the urgency of the moment. What should we actually do? What choice do we need to make? And that can feel like a person who doesn't want to do the research or has already made up their mind. It can land really badly if people come into the room with completely different kind of paradigms of how do we make choices.
Would you say then that there's some interesting parallels between designers and product managers? That relationship with the relationship between designers and um, engineers or developers working with agile principles, because it seems like so much of what you just described, where there's a disconnect in communications, comes from having different time horizons, having different cadences of what the work is and how long it should take and when it should be, when the benefits of the work should be realized. Are you on a quarterly schedule trying to make stockholders happy or trying to complete your sprints very quickly versus are you taking your time to let a product evolve organically? And yeah, all right, that's not necessarily the best way to summarize the way that designers and experience or work with time, but I do feel like time is a big differentiator here. Time or cadence.
I think that's right. And I also would say that there's a question of really maybe what stage of maturity the project or the enterprise is in, so in the kind of the cult of the startup where everything should be agile and lean and should be done in the quickest way, and you should just learn by doing, ship code,
Hmm.
have users, see what they do.
Break
There's
stuff.
a right there's some wisdom in there, and you certainly can like spend a long time researching and doing many iterations and learn less than by just shipping something and finding out what people want. And that's a really interesting wisdom, and it can be applied and sometimes to make you question maybe, design in some ways, like anything, is about de-risking. Like we think there's a risk that if we don't research this enough, we'll do a bad design. So let's invest in it. But you don't necessarily reinvestigate every single thing. Some things you've got patterns for already. You kind of figure you can do them the standard way, and it's probably fine. I think that so often it's just about choosing when to use which technique, and as you say, the cadence is very important. The time horizon of having to make a decision has a really large impact on that. Again, that kind of move fast and break things philosophy doesn't work so great in a well-established business that has existing customers who get mad if you break the service they're paying,
Or die.
or die, right, or if the plane crashes, and again, in government, which is what I'm now having some experience with, you absolutely have to be very we try to move fast, we try to be nimble, but we have stakeholders, we have statutory obligations that are very important. They're not to be cut cornered. You're not supposed to cut those corners. It's dangerous to do that. So I was very happy, for instance, that we were able to work through a design for a comparison of the rates of COVID among vaccinated and unvaccinated people, and we got that out in six weeks. And while we were doing it, I felt like I was pulling teeth. It was taking forever to get the data validated, to get the approvals. But when I took a step back, I thought, hey, on government time, 6 weeks is pretty fast. It's only a couple sprints really. So I think we did well. But again, you have to that we didn't do it by acting like a startup that had zero kind of consequences of our decision.
Time. It's just a pain in the ass. And speaking of which, we're going to take a quick break. You're listening to the Rosenfeld Review with my guest, Christian Crumlish. I hope you're enjoying the podcast. If you want more, not only do we have a whole bunch of podcasts in our archive, but we have something that's very current, very alive, and very engaging for groups, and that is our communities. Rosenfeld Media runs a variety of communities that meet on a monthly basis for video conferences on a variety of topics near and dear to UX people, ranging from enterprise experience to advancing research to design and research operations. I want to encourage you to join one of our communities. Again, it is free by going to rosenfeldmedia.com/communities. Not only will you get a monthly video conference that you can listen in on and participate in, ask questions and so forth, we'll give you access to the recordings. And for some of those communities, we're talking about dozens of recordings with really interesting presenters and facilitators. You'll also get a newsletter. You'll get access to an advice columnist. Yes, we actually are providing advice columnists for each community. And finally, if you're interested in our conferences, our communities correspond to our conferences. So you will be the first to know when programs go live, when tickets go on sale, and by the way, most of our conferences sell out, and other good things about our conferences, such as when the scholarship applications open up. So go to rosenfeldmedia.com/communities. You're going to find something that's free, something that's interesting, and it's a great opportunity to find your tribe as well. We'll see you there. Welcome back to the Rosenfeld Review. I'm Lou Rosenfeld. I'm with Christian Crumlish. We are talking about his book, Product Management for UX People, From Designing to Thriving in a Product World, which should be out in January, February of 2022. Supply chain, God willing. And I'll tell you, it's been a pain. It has been a pain. Getting books printed these days takes about twice as long as it did before the pandemic, and that's only part of it. But we're going to get it out. It's at
My part is done. My part is done. My feet are up on the desk already.
The Crumlish aspect of the supply chain is delivered, and we'll take it from here. Christian, speaking of the book, it really is like a service to two kinds of people in design. One is the designer who actually is looking at product management as a role for themselves. They're going to make that move, and you and I certainly know lots of people who started in design or in UX and have done that and really successfully, and more are coming. And I think that's a good thing. The other use case is the people who don't really necessarily know that they want to do that, but they're part of organizations of product managers that they have to work with. They live in that product world from your subtitle, and they are going to get something out of this book as well. Let's start with that first group, though. What do you think the real promise of the book is for people who are UX people moving into product roles?
Well, it's definitely people on that path that inspired the book. And as you mentioned, I mean, I've walked that path myself. I've had UX titles. I was a director of UX teams when I became a director of product teams. So I had a relatively easy lateral transition compared to the way some people have had to break into product management. And along the way, I found that I've noticed more people interested in that path, and I found more people come to me for advice because they're aware that that's something I've done, or because people direct them to me. And that drumbeat has sort of increased over the last couple of years, to the point that a couple of years ago, I put together a sort of informal Slack community for people on that spectrum or the cusp between UX and product who want to talk about it. Some are coming back the other way or coming in from engineering, but people who think that overlapping area is interesting and murky and needs some figuring out. And the book in many ways really did kind of grow out of that compost, that conversation, and a growing sense that a lot of people were interested in that. Sometimes I think anyone who's been around UX for a while probably is aware that there's a career issue that designers often struggle with, which is, do I have to put down my tools and become a manager to advance? And sometimes the answer has been no. We have a principal role. We have these distinguished roles. You can continue to be just a very high-powered individual contributor and continue to be seen as a leader and a top performer and things like that. That same, I see the question of should I become a product manager as sort of a cousin to that should I become a design manager question. It appears to be another career path that might be available to some people and might be desirable. I think particularly, to those of us who came into UX, not necessarily purely from a graphic design or communications design orientation, although I love those things and they're important to me, but I came more from writing and from information. I was an IA, self-identified, before I was an interaction designer, before I was a UX designer, before I was a product manager. And if you're already kind of thinking of the strategy and the system level and the big picture and how everything connects, and less about the rounded corners and the motion easing and things like that, then you feel more adjacent to the product manager, I think, and you kind of maybe rub shoulders with product managers more, and maybe you feel like your toes are stepped on more too, because you're like, well, I could have figured that out, or I had an opinion about that. So I try to help people who are thinking along these lines to consider it seriously, including to seriously consider what it's like to be a product manager. Because as I point out, it's not a design job. You will not be using Figma very often. And you'll be in a spreadsheet or in a Jira ticket much more often.
Although isn't that a kind of bit of design? You're designing in the sense of maybe designing a team or designing aspects of a product in terms of things like positioning.
Yes, I agree with what you're saying in the sense that, look, when I became a design manager, I didn't feel like, oh, I'm no longer creative or I'm no longer making stuff, because I felt like orchestrating and deploying the team and bringing out their talents and unblocking them and supporting them gave me a feeling of ownership or parenthood over what was happening in a very satisfying way. But not everybody's able to derive that same creative boost, that feeling of creativity from deploying people, and orchestrating projects. Some people like that's just too talky and abstract for them, or it requires too much interpersonal communication for them, and they'd rather be inside in a drawing environment or a coding environment making stuff.
Wrong design material.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's the point. Is that you should think at least that the materials under your hands are going to change if you move into product, which is fine. It's just do it with open eyes if that's the thing for you. If you decide you would like to do that, then I think really the message of the book is that some of the things that as a UX person, whether you're a researcher, strategist, designer, or whatever your title is, will be super helpful with product, because that overlapping area is real, and you're not wrong to think that you have something to say already about what the product should be and what the priority should be and the things that product managers do. There's a lot you bring to the table as a UX designer, but you don't bring everything to the table. You don't inherently know about those business things that you were talking about before. You might, but odds are you probably don't. You may not be as comfortable delving into the technical stack with an engineer and going toe to toe over whether something's a good idea or not. You may have to brush up on that as well. And if so, then I try to walk through really what are those things that you would need to pick up along the way. In my case, I had mentors and bosses who knew I had gaps and who consciously taught me and put me in positions of learning. And that helped me at some point feel like I really could speak fairly comfortably about that whole spectrum. And then I also try to make the point that these things, don't need to be they can be demystified. They don't have to be so scary or so alien. That being a creative person or a designer doesn't mean that you never have to touch money, or that numbers are your enemy. Like numbers can be your friend. You can learn where you fit in with that. And I think we were talking about during the break, and it goes sort of to the second role, that you can ally with product people and you can bring your UX sensibility to data visualization, for instance, which is an area that really needs attention a lot of time. So if you're changing jobs, you've got all these UX skills that are certainly going to help you along the way. But I do try to point out what you want to pick up in addition to that.
And then those same skills, even if you're not going to make that job change, come together quite nicely with doing things like supporting a product manager that you're working with, right?
Right. I think that's the other thing. And I as you say, if you're simply going to be working with product managers or on teams that are called product teams, as opposed to like being like a marketing team or something like that, which is a valid distinction, then learning the way product managers think, the things they're trying to accomplish, and what they're being judged on or assessed on, what their needs are, what kind of language they use, that will really help you communicate better with them and work better with them, and not run into each other so readily. And I think it's reasonable to say, well, they should learn my way too. They should become smarter about UX, and maybe I'll educate them about those things. But I feel like that's the sort of evangelist bent that UX people sometimes shoot themselves in the foot with, where it's like, not everybody wants to be taught stuff. Not everybody wants to learn your way. Why don't we use that other great UX skill of studying people, of cultivating empathy and understanding, and meeting our users or the people that we're trying to serve much more than halfway, and not saying, well, they should figure out the interface. That I worked hard on this interface. They should study it and learn it. Is obviously not the right way. So similarly, like if you're going to work with product people, then maybe trying to understand where they're coming from will help you work better with them. And then you may find that, as I said, that you have a lot to bring to those things, that you can help them win their arguments with their bosses, or position the team for success, because you can figure out where you align. And there's a chapter on the healthy tension that needs to be there. You actually are anchored in different values, and that's okay, between design and product. The product person is sort of thinking holistically about how can this thing survive in the world as a commodified service that can sustain itself, which is a little different from how do we make the best possible experience for customers or users. They relate in a very strong way, but they're not inherently the same thing. And at best, you actually make use of that tension to find the third thing that's really wonderful.
I mean, you've covered so much just in those last couple sentences, but I really love that you're, again, like a lot of other wise people in the industry, reminding us to put aside our savior complexes, to maybe not do so much solutioneering, maybe do a little bit more, should we call it listeneering? Sorry, that's a horrible word, but it is Friday. Hey, Christian, we're going to need to wrap in a minute, but I do want to give you a moment to weigh in as part of our tradition on the Rosenfeld Review of calling out someone or something that you think our listeners would really benefit from knowing about and maybe could use a little more attention.
Right. Well, I was thinking about this, and I have a name in mind, a person in mind who, if you're already familiar with the product world, you may have encountered him already. He's somebody that I met personally early on in my career. I interviewed for a job that he didn't hire me for, but that we still stayed on each other's radar over the years. And he's always someone I've turned to a couple times, for advice. A fellow named Ken Norton, and he has had a number of interesting product roles, including for a long time he was at Google Ventures, but he's currently now independent and kind of just leaning totally into educating and coaching. And he's got a newsletter called Bringing the Donuts, I believe, which is his kind of one of his slogans, is that the product manager always brings the donuts. That's part of the fundamental job. But it's a very wise newsletter. He's got great context, so he tells good stories from the industry. And he's my kind of PM in the sense that I think he's not just that stereotype of a business head who's just, kind of cranking the numbers out in a soulless way. I think he really he certainly gets UX. So if you come from a UX perspective, I think his newsletter would have things for you as well.
Fantastic. So Ken Norton, will have a URL in the wrap up of the podcast. Thanks for sharing that. And Christian, thank you. It's great to talk with you. I wish we had more time. But the good news is that if you, dear listener, want to get a little bit more of this conversation, well, there's a whole book coming out in January, February timeframe, Product Management for UX People, From Designing to Thriving in a Product World, from Rosenfeld Media. Christian, great to have you. Thanks again, and can't wait for the book to come out.
Thanks for having me, Luke. Always a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to the Rosenfeld Review, brought to you by Rosenfeld Media. If you like our show, please subscribe and review it on iTunes, Stitcher, or your favorite podcast platform. I'd love it if you tell a friend to have a listen, and check out our website for over 100 podcasts with other interesting people. You'll find them all at rosenfeldreview.com.